The Galactica Peace Summit was supposed to be historic. Delegates from every major species in the Orion Arm had convened inside a shimmering spire carved from translucent meteorite, suspended in neutral orbit around the gas giant Telemar 4. Security was tight, tension was tighter, and every being in the chamber spoke in hushed tones about the newest species to earn a seat at the table: humans. The Earth contingent was expected hours ago. They arrived exactly 16 minutes late, blasting Eye of the Tiger from their diplomatic cruiser as it docked. No one had warned the Council that human punctuality was a cultural suggestion, not a rule. Riley Monroe, Earth's lead diplomat, disembarked alone. No security detail, no entourage. Just a 5'8" messy ponytail, a stained gray blazer rolled at the sleeves, and an old cassette Walkman clipped to her belt like a badge of honor. She was chewing spearmint gum and looked around the assembly as though she'd wandered into the wrong building looking for a 7-Eleven. She walked straight through the shimmering wall of scanning drones, pausing only to squint at a towering bug-eyed sentient who looked like a praying mantis cross with chandelier. "Nice hat," she said, nodding at his ornate antennae. He blinked both sets of eyes and made a sound like wind chimes in a blender. Riley smirked, not slowing. The security bots trailed behind her, uncertain whether this was some advanced psychological maneuver or a gross breach of decorum. The council chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence as she took her place at the circular table. 12 representatives stared at her, 12 species that had survived cosmic wars, extinction-level asteroid strikes, and 4 interstellar empires. And now, a human in a wrinkled blazer had just plopped into the seat with her boots on the glowing edge of the diplomatic disc. Riley pulled a tape from her pocket, blew imaginary dust off it, and slid it into her Walkman. "Let's get this over with," she said, pressing play. "You guys got coffee, or just weird glowing drinks that taste like soap?" The Oxorian delegate, Commander Voktal, an 8-foot-tall reptilian strategist with skin like volcanic glass, snarled in disbelief. "You disrespect the assembly with tardiness and chewing," he hissed. "Yep," Riley replied, popping a bubble. "And if I had time, I'd disrespect your haircut too, but I'm told this is supposed to be a peace talk." There was a beat of silence, followed by a squawk of confusion from the Pytharan senator, whose species communicated primarily through rhythmic tongue clicks and interpretive wing gestures. The translator bots chatted for a moment before stammering. He asked if all humans are this structurally unbalanced. Riley raised an eyebrow. "Did he just call me crazy? You know what? I'll allow it." Voktal slammed a clawed fist into the table. "Earth's representatives have not honored the Treaty of Mutual First Contact. You ignore customs, dismiss protocols, and now this, insulting behavior in a sacred hall of unity. Do you come to mock us?" "Not unless mocking comes with salary bump," Riley replied, cracking her neck. "Listen, Commander Lizard, Earth didn't crawl out of its gravity well just to be patted on the head and told to behave. We're new to this little galactic book club, but that doesn't mean we're children." "Your species' behavioral data contradicts that statement," Vok said, eyes narrowing. "Your historical records are a catalog of war, tribalism, addiction to weaponized entertainment, and irrational soft drink consumption." "Exactly," Riley said, leaning forward, her smile going razor-thin. "And we survived every bit of it. We built civilizations while eating flaming hot corn-based snacks and watching grown men fight in spandex. We invented nuclear fission before we figured out proper dental hygiene. You think that makes us weak? No, Commander. It makes us unbreakable." The murmurs rose. Even the robotic Avarex delegate, whose race prided itself on emotional neutrality, flickered with a few confused pulses of red light. Voktal glanced toward his adjutants, who shook their scale heads in response to an unspoken query. The humans had been analyzed, simulated, profiled, and yet this woman didn't fit any of the psychological projections. No aggression, no panic, just insolence and casual defiance. Vok's jaw tightened. "Earth has not been cleared for military presence. No escort, no armament permits. Why are you alone?" Riley shrugged. "Because I figured anything goes sideways, I can handle it myself." "Preposterous," the commander spat. "One soft-bodied biped? Our warriors trained for decades in atmospheres you can't survive. You are nothing but a carbon bag held together by undercooked proteins." She leaned back and smiled like someone waiting for a punchline to land. Funny, I used to teach carbon bags how to dismantle orbital railguns with duct tape and a grudge. But hey, I'm here to talk peace. You want to fight? We'll fight. But don't whine when you find out we don't stay down. Then it happened. A subtle hand signal from Vox Second. A whisper in a language Riley recognized from classified briefings. The room shifted. Before she could stand, something stung her chest. Then again. Her breath hitched. The alien guards opened fire. 9 charged plasma bolts struck her center mass. Her body jerked backward and fell still across the polished surface of the council table. Chaos broke out. One delegate shrieked, another dove under their seat. Emergency sirens blared in 3 languages. The translator bot stammered in binary. Voktal stood over Riley's crumpled form, issuing orders to contain the humans and scrub the surveillance logs. He declared her a threat. He demanded a communications blackout. He called it necessary preemptive defense. But his fourth heart began to race when he noticed something that should not have been possible. She wasn't bleeding. A strange, metallic sheen pulsed beneath the torn blazer. The fabric melted away to reveal a cracked but intact weave of polyreactive nanofiber mesh. The same kind rumored to be used only by Earth's disavowed Black Ops soldiers. The peacekeepers called them shadows, ghosts in human skin. Riley coughed, groaned, sat up slowly. Vox stepped back. The guards raised their weapons again. Her eyes locked onto him, unblinking. I'm going to pretend that was a culturally confused greeting, she said flatly, then winced and spat something metallic onto the floor. But I'm not in the mood to forgive right now. The guards opened fire again. She moved faster than the sensors could track. One slammed into the wall. Another collapsed before his weapon fully raised. She caught the third's rifle midair, twisted it backward, and with a bone-cracking crunch, disarmed him, literally. Vok turned and ran. Riley stood amidst a pile of dazed aliens, face unreadable, voice low. I came here for peace. But now, I'm going to need my coffee, a plasma torch, and directions to your training facility. Because whatever this was, she flexed her shoulder, rotating it like a retired prizefighter. It just made things personal. Behind her, the audio log recorded everything. Across the galaxy, eyes would soon witness the moment a human diplomat took 9 shots to the chest and stood up angry. She adjusted her Walkman, switched the tape. The haunting guitar of Bad to the Bone began to play. Riley Monroe walked calmly toward the exit, leaving scorch marks in her wake. She wasn't coming back to the negotiation table. Not until someone begged. And for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council wasn't sure if they just sparked a war or met their reckoning. The lights in the lower corridors flickered as Riley moved, leaving behind the grand chamber with its cracked protocols and stunned witnesses. Alarms were still screaming overhead, but none dared block her path. Word traveled fast in places like this, faster than plasma, faster than reason. Somewhere between her rising from 9 plasma hits and tearing a weapon from an elite guard's hand, the entire base had accepted a new truth. Earth wasn't just unorthodox. It was dangerous in ways no metric could measure. She walked with a limp, not from pain, though there was plenty, but because the nanoweave was tightening against her ribs, constricting to maintain internal pressure. Field grade, military issue. She hadn't worn it in 6 years. Hadn't needed to. Diplomats weren't supposed to march into combat. But Earth knew better. Earth didn't send lambs to the table. They sent former wolves pretending they'd found religion. Her hand pressed against the wall and activated a junction node. She bypassed the language interface entirely, using a numerical cipher embedded into old Earth diplomatic credentials. The aliens hadn't expected anyone to know about the backdoors Earth had quietly slipped into the galactic bureaucracy. Humans were new to the Alliance, but their techs had been busy behind the curtains. Riley always believed in redundancy, especially when walking into rooms where her species was outnumbered 1 billion to 1. The map unfolded in fractal layers. Riley didn't need the full layout, just one location. The Oxorian Tactical Indoctrination Wing. Not a school, not even a facility in the usual sense. More like a glorified boot camp laced with paranoia and low ceilings. It was here that Oxorian High Command had started training elite squads under a Black Flag directive, not for defense, not even for planetary control, They were preparing for something else. She remembered the intercepted transmission 3 months ago. Fuzzy audio, thick accents, but clear intent. Clone approximation within 92% fidelity. Behavioral compliance rising. Oxorian researchers using Oath culture to build obedient replicas. But no one in the council had confirmed it. Now she knew why. The entire diplomatic invitation had been bait. Her boots echoed as she crossed into Sector Delta. A rust-colored floor, cold steel walls, flickering stasis tanks lined the corridor. Each one contained half-formed humanoid shapes, malformed and twitching. One attempted a thumbs-up through the glass. Another began singing in a warped imitation of a 90s boy band chorus, the words garbled but painfully familiar. Her expression didn't change. They weren't human. They were approximations stitched together from intercepted broadcasts and fragmentary DNA stolen from medical shipments. One even had a faux leather jacket with Radical Dude stitched on the back. She stepped closer and read the plaque beneath it. Human type, cultural warrior. Function, morale sabotage. Riley had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. These people had spent millions of credits trying to distill Earth's chaotic nature into obedient soldiers, and thought a Bart Simpson quote constituted psychological warfare. She moved deeper, past the tanks, toward the sound of impact training. The room beyond was larger, open, lit with violet-tinted overheads. 20 aliens surrounded a combat ring. In the center, a clone, barely finished, was grappling with a simulation drone. It shouted, "Hasta la vista, baby," and promptly tripped over its own feet. The alien instructors groaned. One took notes on a tablet-like device with all the patience of a man trying to teach sarcasm to a toaster. Riley stepped into the light. The nearest alien toned and dropped its clipboard. The others backed away slowly, not in fear, but with the eerie hesitance of people watching a forest fire move toward their fuel depot. She raised one hand and pointed at the clone. "Who made that thing?" No one answered. She repeated herself, slower. "Who authorized Earth-based cloning experiments under false diplomatic pretext?" A voice crackled from above. It was Voktal, patching in from the secure command tier. "You have violated multiple quarantine zones. This is an act of war." Riley glanced up, unimpressed. "You already declared war when you used 9 plasma bolts instead of 9 words. Let me give you a return policy." Her left boot clicked against the floor as she planted herself in front of the clone, then waved a single hand toward the training drone. "You there, Robocop, give me a status check." The drone's optics blinked. Authorization required. She flipped her badge at it, fast enough that only a fraction of a second showed the encoded layer. The drone hesitated, then answered. "Subject non-compliant. Displays conflicting personality schema. Default human identity is Joey Tribbiani." The clone grinned at her and said, "How asterisk you asterisk doing?" Riley closed her eyes and inhaled through her teeth. Somewhere, deep in the twisted core of her humor, she could appreciate the absurdity. But not here. Not now. She turned away, stepped to the terminal, and began typing. Not many knew that Riley had been one of the last remaining field officers in the abandoned Earth directive known as Spectral Contact. Her job had been to infiltrate early alien black sites before they even admitted humans existed. Now it came full circle. The override code unlocked a secure file named Project Backboard. She scanned the summary. Behaviorally modeled humans. Not for infiltration. Not for diplomacy. For distraction. A literal army of walking punchlines, memes, slogans, and sitcom personalities, all designed to make Earth look ridiculous when it mattered most. Subtle humiliation disguised as praise. She uploaded a microburst virus from her watch, gifted by a hacker in Detroit with the alias Cheeseburger 404. The virus triggered recursive logic loops in every clone brain within a 100-yard radius. Within seconds, the Joey clone began repeating its line. So did another, then another. The room became a horrific chorus of 90s sitcom charm, endlessly looping. Riley turned to the onlookers, who now watched in horror. "This is what happens when you think Earth's soft power is for sale. You want our culture, but not the cost, not the chaos. You can't borrow our legends without waking our nightmares. A comm panel burst alive again. Voktal's voice returned, strained and clipped. You are trespassing. You are contaminating sovereign installations. Your actions will lead to orbital retaliation. Riley looked up, calm. Good. That means you're listening. She reached for the reinforced door that separated the training facility from its core server room. It was nearly 5 inches thick, made of composite alloys rated to withstand internal reactor leaks. She grabbed it by the hydraulic hinges and began pulling. Alarm screamed again. Mechanical arms hissed as they resisted. The metal groaned. Her suit, laced with pressure-dispersing threads, surged with artificial muscle. 1 breath. 2. The door bent, screamed, and tore away in a shriek of sparks and shattered bolts. She dropped it behind her with a crash. Behind the breach, dozens of command personnel stood in stunned silence, monitors frozen mid-frame, scripts still blinking on their screens. Riley stepped over the threshold, hair a mess, knuckles split, Walkman humming some forgotten 80s anthem at low volume. She looked at the officers like a teacher walking into a chaotic classroom. Let's start over, she said. I'm Riley Monroe. Diplomat, technically, but you can call me your wake-up call. No one spoke. One alien fainted. She raised a finger and pointed at the central server console. You're going to download every document related to Project Backboard. Every file, every neural template, every memo. You're going to pack it nicely and hand it over. And if you even think about activating a countermeasure, I'll rip out your ventilation system and shove it down your interspecies throat. The lights flickered again. Voktal, now watching through the emergency feed, finally realized what he was dealing with. Not a rogue negotiator. Not a security failure. Riley Monroe was an instrument of Earth's real doctrine, deterrence through unpredictability. The Oxorians had built their empire through fear. But they'd never prepared for a species that smiled while falling, or laughed in the face of plasma fire. They had expected resistance. They hadn't expected someone who tore doors off walls after taking 9 shots to the chest just to prove a point. As Riley stood among the frightened architects of an entire miscalculated war strategy, she smiled, not with triumph, but with purpose. The game had changed. The question now wasn't what Earth would do next. It was what the galaxy would do to stop her before she turned the next facility into a footnote in someone's history lesson. And she was only getting started. The air inside the command chamber was heavy with tension, a mixture of ozone, fear, and rising panic. Riley stood alone at the center, flanked by walls pulsing with data streams and panicked technicians who couldn't quite decide whether to obey her or throw themselves out the nearest emergency duct. Several had tried the latter. One was still wedged halfway through a ventilation shaft, muttering something about cursed humans and metaphysical loopholes. None of it slowed her. A technician with 6 arms and a head like a melted hammerhead shark stammered as he reached for the nearest console. Riley didn't speak. She didn't need to. One look from her was enough. He paused, shifted his chair back, and pulled up the directory. The files loaded. Tens of thousands of hours of research, psychological mapping, stolen entertainment packets, behavioral mimicry routines. Every bite of it constructed from intercepted Earth signals, twisted into something weaponized and soulless. She crossed the room and tapped a command key before he could finish uploading the first cluster. The system groaned as it began burning all of it to a single encrypted core crystal, glowing bright blue like a contained star. When it finished, she yanked it from the port and slipped it into her jacket pocket. The technician opened his mouth to protest. She raised her brow slightly. He swallowed and looked down. The screen beside her flickered again, showing Voktal pacing in his upper tower, mandibles twitching with fury. His tail lashed behind him like a whip. He hadn't expected her to survive, hadn't expected her to resist. He certainly hadn't planned for her to breach 2 high-security installations within an hour, using nothing but bad attitude, retro tech, and a pain tolerance that defied anatomical logic. She tapped the screen, sending her image directly into his chamber feed. "Commander," she said, voice calm but sharp, "I'm going to make this easy. Shut down every clone protocol. Delete your behavioral archives. Transmit your involvement to the Council. Do that, and I walk away. Lie again, and I start improvising. You threaten a senior Council species." Vok snarled, eyes glowing faintly. "You are one human, and your station here is non-existent. You have no formal backing, no war fleet, no allies. You sure about that? She asked, smiling faintly. Because I've got two other things you forgot to mention. A good memory and a very long list. Vok waved a hand, and the signal cut out. She exhaled and turned away from the console, already hearing movement in the corridors. Heavy steps. Staggered breathing. They were coming in fast now, full lockdown response. They weren't going to try taking her alive anymore. She walked to the far side of the room and activated the lockdown override using a code buried in the Council's diplomatic route matrix, another gift from Earth's backdoor engineering team. The corridor opened. Before stepping out, she reached into her jacket and retrieved the backup drive she kept strapped to her ribcage. The core crystal wasn't the only copy. That had just been theater. She always played long odds with backup plans. The hallway ahead was filled with trainees, dozens of Oxorian hybrid soldiers, bred for speed, strength, obedience. Behind their sharp movements and gleaming armor were faces that weren't fully alien. Some had attempted human features. One had even been modeled after an 80s action star, though badly. The eyes were wrong, the proportions unnatural, and the smile far too practiced. Riley stared into it and felt her stomach twist. Not with fear, with disgust. A voice rang out from the squad leader. Human agent. Surrender. You first, she replied. No one moved. She reached down and pulled from her side a compact launcher, something cobbled together from an alien energy cell, a mining tool, and the remnants of a cafeteria heater. Earth's field operatives called them snack cannons. She'd rigged it to fire pulse charges capable of disrupting armor plating at close range. Ugly, imprecise, and wholly terrifying. She raised it, fired once. The leader's shield shattered, sending him tumbling backward into two others. A chain reaction of panic spread through the line. Riley moved forward like an avalanche wearing boots, knocking two aside with elbows, ducking under a wide arc, and slamming her forearm into another's throat before spinning and landing a heel into the back of the clone shaped like a sitcom dad. Another move in behind her. She pivoted, caught him by the wrist, twisted hard. Joint snapped. He crumpled with a grunt that sounded suspiciously like a rejected cartoon catchphrase. She didn't pause. She kept moving. The facility blurred around her into narrow passages, each corner bringing more soldiers, each more poorly calibrated than the last. They moved like they understood tactics, but hadn't owned the instincts. They hesitated too long. She didn't. By the time she reached the facility's power junction, her sleeves were torn, knuckles blooded, and the launcher was overheating from use. She tossed it into a maintenance shaft and instead pulled free a low-frequency disruptor baton, stolen earlier from one of the guards. It wasn't much, but it would finish what she needed. At the main conduit, she activated her last override. The room dimmed as the primary grid began to flicker. She bypassed the safety protocols and introduced a feedback loop through a behavior control network. Every clone, every drone, every remote AI being fed Earth data for personality replication. Scrambled. Within seconds, chaos erupted in the facility. She watched on a small screen as clones began malfunctioning, arguing with themselves, quoting contradictory catchphrases. One broke into an impromptu rap battle with another over the definition of totally tubular. Several began speaking in a garbled mixture of game show buzzwords and fitness infomercial jargon. An officer clone screamed, "Set it and forget it," before headbutting a support column. The simulation broke down. The control room behind her buzzed with static. She turned away from the site and made her way back toward the external dock. The escape plan wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Earth's diplomatic ship had a rudimentary stealth module, enough to get her off-planet if she timed it right. As she sprinted down the final ramp, explosions echoed behind her. Her lungs burned, muscles aching from every impact and strain. But she didn't stop, because she knew this wasn't just sabotage. This was exposure. By the time she reached the hangar, two guards were waiting. They stood their ground, weapons raised, eyes confused. "You're not supposed to be alive," one of them said. "That's been said about me a lot," Riley replied, not slowing. She vaulted over a crate, used some momentum to slam into the first one shoulder first, grabbed the second weapon mid-spin, and drove her knee into his chest before firing two stun rounds into the wall to trigger the hangar doors. They parted, revealing the waiting diplomatic cruiser. Its hull was scuffed. A chunk of the side panel was singed. The blast shield over the cockpit window was stuck halfway open. But it was home. She climbed in, collapsed into the pilot seat, and punched the start-up sequence. A familiar hum filled the cabin. The screen lit up with Earth's signature boot logo, a crude pixelated globe wearing sunglasses. She exhaled and touched the panel above the nav controls. The ship began to lift, slowly, unevenly. Antigraphs flared with stress. The voice assistant, an outdated AI named Hal Jr., crackled to life. "Ms. Monroe," it said, chipper and slightly passive-aggressive. "You're bleeding. Again." "I'm fine." "Statistically unlikely." She grinned. "Start logging." "Logging what?" "The end of someone's brilliant plan. And maybe the start of ours." The ship broke atmosphere in a jagged line, skipping through the patrol grid just before it sealed. Behind her, the facility continued to descend into mayhem. She watched the radar show false signals, clone units broadcasting contradictory orders, simulation programs declaring success while the walls were caving in. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. They would try again. Another project, another method. The galaxy didn't learn fast. And they never understood that humans didn't operate on predictability. They thrive in chaos. That's what made Earth dangerous. Riley activated the encrypted relay, patched into the Terran Oversight Network. A message blinked to life. Short. Simple. Asset awake. Compromise confirmed. Galactic Council infiltration deeper than expected. Oxorian clone project burned. Retribution pending. She added one last line before sending it. Recommend escalation. Then she leaned back, finally allowing the ache in her bones to register. She was covered in dust, bruises, and sarcasm, running on spite and synthetic adrenaline. But her mission had succeeded. She'd exposed the program. And if the aliens thought this was humanity's limit, they were still underestimating them. This wasn't peace broken. It was the truth revealed. And Riley Monroe wasn't going to stop until someone paid for every lie stitched into the galactic order. The cruiser cut through the edge of atmosphere like a thrown brick coated in chewing gum and national debt. The vessel wasn't designed for evasive flight or subtle approaches, but Riley pushed it anyway, threading narrow grave lanes while the navigation AI begged her to stop improvising. She tuned it out. There wasn't time for caution. Her mission wasn't over just because one facility burned. That was a mistake aliens kept making, believing that humans, once winded, would simply lie down and wait to be swept off the board. Riley Monroe had never believed in graceful retreats. The Galactic Council convened on Eltaran Prime, an artificial world floating in the silence between two collapsing stars, a beacon of peace wrapped in polished stone and veiled hostility. She didn't ask for permission to land. She activated her override codes mid-descent and jammed every port authority signal on the way down. As her ship touched ground, several diplomatic shuttles lifted in panic, startled by the way she parked like someone about to return a rental after a gunfight. She didn't dress for the meeting. She didn't shower. Blood was still drying at the collar of her shirt. One boot was partially melted, and the right sleeve of her jacket had been turned into a tourniquet. Her hair was plastered to her face by wind and sweat, and the only thing in her hand was a memory crystal still glowing with raw data. The guards at the entry gate hesitated when they saw her. Then they stepped aside. Even silence can be trained. Inside the Grand Forum, the council was already in session. 12 species arranged in a perfect circle, each seated in hovering pods lined with luminous language translation systems, robes immaculate, expressions carefully composed. They were discussing economic resolutions. Words like reparative parity and multi-species integrity floated through the air like incense. Riley stepped into the center of the chamber without introduction. No one called her forward. She didn't care. The sight of her, half destroyed, bleeding, eyes locked straight ahead, punched a hole in the room's composure. Several delegates paused mid-sentence. One removed his ceremonial headgo and hid it under his seat. A few instinctively scanned for security, but none moved. Vok Tao stood behind his station, his mandibles tight, breathing slow. He had washed his scales. He had adorned himself in war braids laced with silver and claimed to have no knowledge of the incidents hours earlier. He claimed his sector had been hijacked by extremist actors. He offered condolences for the loss of Earth's diplomat, whose status he labeled as presumed vaporized. Then Riley walked in. The silence lasted 7 seconds. She stopped in front of his station and dropped the memory crystal on the platform. It rolled once and stopped near the base of the Council's shared projection terminal. One flick of a finger activated the playback. The images were crude, raw recordings of clone failures, corrupted algorithms mimicking Earth phrases with mangled timing, documents referencing Earth as a cultural virus. And then the worst, lines of text outlining the goal of Project Backboard, strategic discreditation through media inversion and cloned incompetence. The Council watched in a state of mechanical paralysis. Riley's voice broke through it. Calm, measured, cold. You built an army to humiliate Earth. You turned our languages, our culture, our history into jokes. You fed it into artificial minds and expected obedience. You didn't want soldiers. You wanted clowns. Puppets in our image, programmed to fall apart. The Avirex delegate, composed entirely of floating silver spheres, pulsed once. This cannot be verified. Oxorian records are sealed under military code. Which is why I brought mine, she replied, stolen directly from their primary server. I have full replication logs, command signatures, budget allocations, neural imprint templates, and more than 30 hours of security footage. And if you think I only pulled that from one site, you haven't been paying attention. Voktal moved forward, trying to regain control. These accusations. She raised her voice, cutting through his sentence like a blade. They are not accusations. They are autopsies. The chamber shuddered under the weight of that sentence. One of the more ancient delegates, a being composed of pure plasma suspended in a containment field, flickered uncertainly. If what she says is true, it constitutes an act of preemptive psychological warfare against a member world that would violate Section 9, Article 2 of the Integration Charter. Another, a crystalline ambassador from the Murel species, turned toward Riley. What resolution does Earth seek? Riley didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just stepped closer to Vok's station and stared him down. Recognition. Admission of guilt. Dissolution of the Clone Initiative. Expulsion of Oxorian military assets from Earth orbit and human colonies. I want your apologies recorded and televised, in our languages, with your faces shown. Vok hissed, this is blackmail. No, she said, this is justice with a microphone. The delegates conferred among themselves, a low static hum of whispered consensus. Riley remained motionless, hand resting near the crystal drive like she might press it again and show worse. She had plenty more, categorized by level of embarrassment. She'd even saved a segment of a clone declaring it wanted to run for prom king. The council finally spoke. Their judgment wasn't swift, but it was clear. A formal inquiry would begin immediately. Oxorian diplomatic status was suspended pending full investigation. Earth was granted temporary protective sanctions under Galactic Mediation Authority, and Riley Monroe, though technically unauthorized in her methods, was given provisional immunity. Voktal's face said everything he couldn't. Rage, disbelief, humiliation, swirling in the pits of someone who had never before lost control. Riley leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for the translator mics to catch it. You shot me 9 times, she said. Next time, aim for the head. She turned and walked away from the circle. Outside the chamber, a waiting aide from the Earth delegation handed her a battered file case. Inside were new diplomatic credentials, stamped, approved, with an addendum, on-call status authorized for defensive operations under Article 17. Riley stared at it, then tossed it into the trash bin outside the exit gate. She had no intention of sitting behind another negotiation desk. Not yet. Back aboard her ship, she patched into the Terran Oversight Network again. This time, the line was active. A dozen blurred faces greeted her, shadowy profiles from every corner of Earth's underground defense structure. Former agents, intelligence ghosts, 2 or 3 unacknowledged orbital captains. One was eating a sandwich like nothing had happened. She gave the report in under 3 minutes. Precise, objective, efficient. They asked no questions. They knew the price of information in places like these. The operation was marked successful, but not complete. Do we respond further? One of them asked. Riley looked out the viewport toward the swirling mass of diplomatic vessels now orbiting in paranoid circles. Her hand tapped the empty shell casing she'd worn as a necklace for 20 years. Then she shook her head. No need. I planted the seed. Let them panic for a while. And if they rebuild? They will, she said. That's the nature of cowards. But now they'll look over their shoulder every time they try. That's enough for now. The feed ended. She leaned back in her chair, pulled her legs up onto the console, and pressed play on her cassette again. The static kicked in before the music did. Old Earth tunes, played through aging magnetic tape, barely audible through the hum of the ship. She didn't care. It was home. As the stars drifted past, she allowed herself one moment of stillness. Not peace, not satisfaction, just a pause between storms. She knew more would come. They always did. But the galaxy was learning something, one bruised ego at a time. Earth didn't just fight wars. It rewrote the rules around them. Riley wasn't the last. She was a start, somewhere down there, or up there, or waiting on the edge of another star. Someone was watching that council feed. Someone was learning just how far a human would go when underestimated. Someone was realizing that for all their power, their order, their elegance, they had just been outmaneuvered by a woman with one boot half melted and a tape player duct taped to her hip. And someone, somewhere, was already making the mistake of thinking she'd stopped.